So welcome to a short presentation about the urban transformations that Vienna faced in the last, let's say, centuries. Because I will start with the Roman Empire and the Roman fortification on the Danube River, which was somehow the core and the kernel of the urban development of Vienna. What you can see here is the Roman fortification, but also the layout of one of the most important and prominent streets, the so-called Ringstraße, which is somehow defining all the public representative buildings of the former Austrian Empire. But you still can see in the fabric and in the structure of the city the old Roman fortification, the old Roman layout of the fortification. So if we look at the city center of Vienna nowadays, you see my cursor? Yeah? No, you don't see my cursor. Okay, so I will try to explain it verbally. You see, this is the medieval city center of Vienna, and you still can have an idea where the Roman foundation was positioned in this historic context. But to continue with the transformation process and to give an idea about how Vienna changed during the centuries, and I will point out a couple of very important, let's say, phases. The glacis, this fortification field around the walls of the medieval city, this is now what I spoke about, this imperial Ringstraße with its important public buildings. Then we will talk about the Red Vienna, which is a social housing program that happened between the two world wars. Then I will give a short overview about the renewal process after World War II, caused by a lot of damages that have been done during the war to the city and to the building stock of the city. Then I will talk a little bit about urban planning, but not too much, about social housing, how it is going on at the moment in Vienna, what are the recent approaches to social housing in the context of the city, and the new challenges that we face nowadays in urban design. So from glacis to ring. As you can see here, this is the medieval city kernel. There is this huge fortification that was improved and mostly built against the invasion of the Turkish army, at that time the Ottoman Empire army. And this empty space you can clearly see between this fortification and the suburbs of the city that has been kept free of anything, vegetation, buildings, whatever, to be able to defend the attacks to the medieval city fortification. But as soon as the technology in military changed, this field has become an important development area for the city of Vienna. And what you see here are the phases from 1867 to 1910 till the beginning of the First World War, where this void in the city, this empty space has been filled up with very representative buildings, with public gardens, with extensions to the imperial palace, and also to administrative buildings like parliament or city council and university and so on. This is a view to the parliament, the city council and the university in the very beginning of the development of this new part and this, let's say, representative public space that has been implemented in this later fortification. That is how it looks nowadays. So the trees grew. Now it's really an impressive green space with a lot of traffic, but also a lot of recreational qualities to the city center. The second aspect that I would like to point out is a very important one in the history of Vienna, because after the First World War, when the Austrian Empire collapsed and just a small country was left over, like Austria is nowadays, with approximately at that time 6 million inhabitants instead of 50. A lot of refugees came to Vienna and filled up all the residential units that have been built already a couple of decades before in the context of the industrialization of the Austrian Empire. And therefore, this internal migration, I would say, among the parts of the empire that came to these more industrialized parts of Europe, of Austria or Austrian-Hungarian Empire, to provide the working force that was needed for the industrialization. So in this speculative phase, a huge part of the city of Vienna has been built, and the quality of these residential blocks have been, as you can see, very rigid, very regular, and also very dense. The specific qualities of the apartments changed in that period very much between districts closer to the city center, where the let's say the new bourgeois society developed, and the people with higher income or small businesses started to build their houses and to live, and those residential parts where only the workers lived, and this kind of social segregation caused an extremely dense and extremely speculative living environment for them. A picture of the living conditions of about the end of the 19th century in Vienna. We had a situation that even the bed was not only used by one person, but by a couple of. So they shared the bed. Some worked in the night and slept during the day, and the other way around. So in this context, when after the First World War, the socialists took over the city council by the first elections, they decided to invest a lot of money into social housing. And one of the most famous buildings at that time is, of course, Karl Marxhof. I think that all of you have heard about it in history of architecture. And so it's 1 kilometer long, about 1,400 apartments, a couple of courtyards attached to each other, and configuring this huge urban structure as an example of how the city of Vienna tried to solve this issue of this disastrous living conditions of the working class. So this, for example, is a short cutout of a floor plan of this apartments, where you see that there is a toilet within the layout of the apartment, which hasn't been in the living conditions before. So after the Second World War, besides the social housing program that continued, the city also faced a lot of damages by the attacks of the Allied forces against the Nazi regime, and therefore about 60% of the housing stock in Vienna has been demolished, damaged. So in the 50s, Vienna started to break down these historic structures of the block, and continued with an approach that came from this modern movement from the late 30s in Germany, with south-oriented apartments in modern flats, where you have an elevator, where you have a bathroom, where you have a balcony, qualities that haven't been provided in this city structure that has been left over from the empire. So as you see here, you have still around these slabs, you have these historic blocks, and these slabs also provide an in-between space for greenery, but also for parking. They built new schools right beside these residential buildings. and so on. This was the approach to solve the problem of a demolished city. That's how it looks like nowadays. It's still in a good condition, and I think it's still a state-of-the-art residential configuration. But these apartments, they really provided a huge step forward in the quality of the floor plans. Now you have a bathroom, now you have a separate kitchen, you have a room for the children by its own, you have a storage space, an elevator, and so many technical facilities, central heating, of course, which is an issue now, especially now in Vienna, because we have about minus 10 degrees. So these things had a lot of advantages, but also forced the city to transform into a new structure. And against that, in the 70s, a lot of architectural students started to demonstrate against this process of demolishing the city, and they proposed to renovate the existing old structure and adapt it with the technical issues, the technical facilities that are necessary for a living condition that is state of the art at that time already in the 70s. So these demonstrations led to a dramatic change in the approach of urban renewal, and by that also in the policies for social housing. Because the city started to fund not only institutions, usually led by architects, to somehow manage these kind of processes, but also to support the owners of the building in their process of renovating the neighborhood. So as you can see here, this was a Baroque district in 1960, totally damaged. No light, no running water, a lot of prostitution, drug dealing, and so on was going on in this spectacular environment. And nowadays it looks like this. It's one of the most fashionable living districts in Vienna, and it's a quite, let's say, a luxury environment with a limited traffic, limited access to the streets, so it's more pedestrian friendly, more bicycle friendly. And the historic buildings have been adapted and documented in their history. So what we have nowadays as well is that we have a very precise documentation in GIS about all the buildings, where they are located, when have they been built. Usually we know the architects, the year of construction, and even further detailed information. When we go back to this grid, this let's say this kind of raster city, this block structure, we have in this process of social housing and urban renewal, we have also the wish formulated by the city council, but also the wish of the residents of this neighborhood, that it's necessary to improve the conditions for ventilation, but also for natural light in the apartments. Because of the huge density, we hardly could have natural light in the apartments in the ground floors, at least in the rooms that are facing the courtyards. So the idea was to demolish buildings in the courtyards, as you can see, those that are yellow marked in this sketch, and replace these volumes, or at least a part of it, by rooftop apartments, by extensions in the height of the surrounding structure. So this approach somehow tried to enable a better situation in the courtyard of this city of the 19th century. This just gives a rough idea how this 19th century city worked. It was a very mixed structure. It was a lot of housing in the upper floors, but the ground floor, the basement, was usually used for workshops, for stores, for whatever, these kind of economic activities that are important for the urban life. And as you can see, a lot of public space or public life has been happening in the streets, because there were no cars at that time, just some horses. So as a result of this densification, we see these courtyards above, and the idea of the new concept is to see a situation like in the lower drawing, where the courtyards become a green space, provide better ventilation, better light situation. This is a short idea about the technical facilities we had in that town. People shared toilets that have been placed outside the building, outside the apartment on the corridor. So there was one toilet for 2 or 3 apartments. There was one water pipe with running water for the whole amount of apartments in one floor. And in the kitchen, you just had an oven, and then maybe an additional room for the bed. So it was really a problematic situation, and this lasted until the end of the 70s. So it's not that long ago that it was that you could find apartments like that in Vienna. Because of that, the income of the landlords have been very low, because you couldn't rent these apartments for a higher price. So the income was low, the condition of the building went down, and this was the idea of these improvements that the city of Vienna tried to configure. As you can see here, they broke down one of these buildings in the courtyards. They tried to increase the quality of the apartments by adding terraces, adding new technical infrastructure, of course, renovating the staircases, the pipes, the electricity, but also maybe install an elevator, and of course do some physical improvement of the facade. That means insulation and so on. And also the quality of the courtyards changed a lot. Not only the facades became beautiful, but also the backyards. Suddenly you had some row houses instead of some old workshops, and so this changed a lot the situation of the city of Vienna. So in 1920, we started with this social housing program, and nowadays we have nearly 2,000 already apartments under the control of the council. That means they are owned by the city of Vienna, and they are provided to the residents at an affordable price. Even some of them who can't even afford that social rates, they also get some additional funding from the city. As we spoke about in the 70s, when this new approach to renovation started to happen, these area renewal offices that we call in German Gebietsbetreuungen, this is a kind of supervision for an area in a direct translation, that was run by architects, was managed by architects, and they helped the owners of the buildings, but also the residents, to deal with this process of renovation, and of course also with the fact that after the renovation the prices went up, the apartments became more expensive. But this was somehow compensated by funds that have been provided by the city of Vienna. Of course, these architects were not allowed to work in these areas of the city, in these parts of the city, during their being in charge of this kind of moderation process. So as you can see, there was a huge amount of apartments renovated and brought to a state-of-the-art technical condition in a couple of years, you can already say. And what another very important aspect in this process is that we tried, or the city of Vienna tried, not to let social segregation happen. This is very essential in this program, and that was also the reason that the city of Vienna became awarded with a prize by the UN Habitat, because usually if you improve the conditions in a quarter, in a district, then as a result of the increase of the prices, you have a change of the inhabitants. because the people that lived before in this precarious situation, they did that because they couldn't afford better. And so they had to move out. And this was one of the main goals of this socialist city administration, that people with low incomes receive funding or receive conditions, not market conditions in their rates, but conditions they can afford. And this was combined with the funding, also with the subsidized housing program that has been installed in these areas. Just to give you an overview about this enormous amount of apartments for the city of Vienna, what you see here in red is what urgently, parts of the city that urgently have to be renovated and approved. And this, a couple of years later, about 10 years later, was the result of it. So yellow means it's just a part of the buildings in these districts still have to be improved. So this is a huge progress that happened in a very few years and brought the city to a total new level of living conditions. Beside that, when Austria joined the European Union, there was a program that somehow supported cities in upgrading, let's say, difficult areas, difficult districts. And one of the difficult districts was one of the main traffic access in Vienna. What you see here, this kind of channel going through this ocean of houses, is the Gürtel, it's the belt called. Vienna city belt is one of the main axes. It has about 3 or 4 lanes in each direction, and in the middle there is the subway line, sometimes elevated, sometimes underground, depends on the topography. And this area has been also, like the Spittelberg in the 60s, has been in the 80s and 90s a district of prostitution, drug dealing, low-income housing, crime, pickpocketing, and so on. A lot of yes, let's say problematic issues in the context of the urban structure. And in this program funded by the European Union called Urban One, the city improved especially the quality of the public space, which is a very important factor in upgrading districts. And you can do a good upgrading residential buildings or any kind of buildings, but if you don't care about the public space, the effect will not really last long. So most important is that you upgrade the public space, that people feel safe, that people can use it again, and that you have this kind of social control that keeps the society working. So by upgrading the arches of this traffic building of the subway, by opening them up with glass walls so that they became transparent, visible, increase the social control, upgrade the lighting, reorganize the traffic, bring shops, bars, and so on back to this space, to this public space. This part of the city totally changed. And nowadays, we also have some landmarks that are covered transport hubs where you can change between different modes of transportation, from tramway to subway to bus and so on. This is all embedded in a strategy that is called urban development strategy. It's usually thought in 10-year steps into the future. And in addition to this general approach, there are a couple of very specific programs like green space program, mobility program, or high-rise building regulations that are additionally worked out for this kind of planning strategy. So this planning strategy defines the areas where the city has to focus on or wants to focus on. There is a development potential in certain areas because of a good infrastructure. there is a potential for development because the city owns land, and as soon as the city has control over the land, it can of course steer very clearly the process of development. And one of these regions where the city owned a lot of land was the former airfield of Vienna until the First World War, or let's say until the Second World War. The city of Vienna had an airfield like every European city, but in the northern part of the city, in the northern side of the Danube. And this land was still owned by the city, although the airport was already replaced to another part and not even anymore in the administrative area of the city. So this former airfield has been ready for development, and in 1992 there was a first approach to develop this huge piece of land, about 150 hectare, into a residential and partly an economical development. Architect Leiner at that time, he was one of the young, quite famous architects at that time. He did the first proposal that we just saw, a very radical but also very abstract approach for this development. And it never happened. It never happened because in these days, the city couldn't provide proper public transportation for this part of the development. So there was only a train track in the north, but there was no subway, no light railway or whatever available in this area. So in 2005 there was another competition with very different frame settings, that because the city decided that they will build the subway line into this development area before they even start building the first residential units there. So they provided the infrastructure and then they started developing the area, which is very unusual, but it was a very successful approach. So nowadays, this it's called Seestadt because of the small artificial lake you see here in the picture in front. Seestadt became, I think, a quite successful development in the northern part of the city. Behind the idea of this development was, of course, also the idea of bringing people into public transport. That means reducing individual traffic by a strict parking management, by garages that are not directly related to the residential buildings, but to the neighborhood. So you had always to walk a little bit to be able to access your car, which makes the use of public transportation a bit more attractive because, yeah, you have the same distance to reach the bus stop or the subway that you have to reach your car. And I think nowadays we see in some parts already a quite lively neighborhood with a lot of used public spaces, with working schools, with restaurants, bars, and so on. But still, nearly half of it is not done yet. And I hope you see the possibility in a couple of years to come to Vienna and to visit this interesting project. I think it's worth having a look at. A second approach, very similar to that one, but also with the big advantage of just one landowner, was a former train station. So beside this, in many, many cases in Vienna, social housing in the last decades happened on former train stations because of the reorganization of the Austrian railway system. The city could give up, or the rail system, the rail companies could give up a lot of train stations, and this land was given to the city of Vienna, bought by the city of Vienna, to develop residential buildings and mixed-use developments under the aspect of subsidized housing. So in this particular project, the idea was to keep as much green space as possible, because this old train station, of course, it was not used for many decades, so it became a kind of wilderness and attractive to the residents of this part of the city. So they tried to keep as much as possible from this old train station and this old area of the tracks and so on, maintenance, storage parts. And as you can see in this little sketches, to if you bring the same volume into a higher density around this empty void in the middle, this wilderness in the middle, then you can keep the green space, and you don't have to build up everything with a lot of streets and so on. And this was the principal approach of this idea of this competition. It's an urban design competition. This is the winning studio of Leis Drerovitz, and it's called the empty middle, the freie Mitte, the empty middle. As you can see, it's quite accessible from all sides, but it's not really using the whole former train station area as a construction part or a construction field. So as you can see here, it's embedded in the existing city fabric, and it's still in the progress of developing. So I would like now to explain a little bit about the process. Do I still have some time, Nariman, or should I stop slowly? No, we
No,
started later, huh? Yeah, we have a
yes,
little.
we started later. I
Yeah,
think we have
yeah,
still time,
yeah.
Markus.
Yeah, it's not too much anymore. I just want to show a couple of social housing projects that are recently that have been built recently, and to explain a little bit the process, how we develop these kind of competitions. Because what changed in the 80s was that we didn't do anymore just architectural competitions. The city of Vienna started to change into a system of housing developers competitions, where architects and developers together apply with a project into a competition. And that means that they have control about the construction, they have control about, they have to guarantee the price, and they have to provide not only the architecture, but also aspects like social infrastructure, ecology, and of course, a lot of other economic and ecological qualities that have been later on juried by the jury. Beside that, Vienna also participates in Europan competitions. Europan is a European-wide setup of competitions where cities can offer some sites for young architects. This is, I think, limited to the age of 35, if I'm not totally wrong, or something like that, or 40. You have to be younger than that. And you also can participate if you're still a student, if I'm not totally wrong. But anyway, these kind of competitions, they are international. They are open to all interested people that fulfill the requirements of participating. And the cities, at least they say they do their best to make these projects later on happen. And one of these European projects is this Oasis 22, because it's in the 22nd district of Vienna. And the specific idea to this competition was, beside that it has been built by different studios later on, it provides a heterogeneous but still a solid concept for one development. So the architects had to deal with each other, they had to talk with each other, and had to adjust their projects to each other. And it has been combined by an external path on the rooftops, which I will show later. This is just to give you an idea about how residential buildings nowadays look like, how they have In this case, they have a corridor which lets the apartment accessible. You can combine apartments. Usually you have apartments for families, for singles, so different sizes. You have apartments for handicapped people and so on. There is a huge variety of floor plans within one project. And you have this second layer of public space on the rooftops where you connect the different rooftop gardens with all their specific functions, from playgrounds to open air cinemas, sports fields. You can do a jogging tour all around it. And so it's really an interesting aspect for this project. Bridges connect the buildings and the terraces. And beside that, of course, you have this kind of residential park in the middle where you have a cafeteria, you have these community spaces, outdoor and indoor, that are related to that, and playgrounds and so on. So this just to give you an idea how it looks like nowadays in Vienna social housing program. Yeah, this is the aerial view as it is at the moment. Another project which has a similar history, but not with Europan. It was an urban design project. So where you define the position of the volumes, and then you go in a second step into an architectural or into a competition of the developers, where you together with the architect provide proposals for the architecture itself, for the building itself. Here we see a very typical residential building for this affordable housing program of the city of Vienna. You have playgrounds for small children, you have green space, recreational space. You always have a terrace or a balcony or a loggia in front of the apartment, but also the facilities to have to provide some shade. These are the corridors. You can bring your Kinderwagen, your baby carrier, up to the floor where your apartment is, or your bicycle. So they are spacious enough. They are also spacious enough to have a meeting with your neighbor, have a chat with your neighbor. Natural light in all the staircases, of course, that's very essential. And always, as I mentioned, this open space, this direct access to open space from each apartment. Situation like before, we have a couple of very different floor plans. We have huge apartments up to 4 sleeping rooms. We have very small ones, just studios. We also provide a kindergarten within this neighborhood. We have storage space in the ground floor for the bicycles, the garbage, and not, of course, for the baby carriers. And we have these kind of social facilities. These are meeting rooms where people from the apartment or from the neighborhood can have a party together. They have usually a kitchen and a toilet, and so they can do their they invite their friends there if the apartment is too small, or come together and have a party, all of them. So this is again just the layout of the different types of apartments, very similar to what we saw before. And now just a few topics that we will have to deal with in the next couple of years. As you know, we have to deal with the dramatic change of our climate. There is one engagement, of course, in the avoiding of an overheating of the planet, but as we are the architects and as we are the planners, we have to make our cities and our living environment ready to be used even under the circumstances that are dramatically for a future. So there are some things that we have to change. We all discussed about the suburbia, the shopping malls, the motorized individual traffic problems, and so on. that started in the 50s, when we also started to demolish our cities to provide space for the cars, space for the motorized individual traffic. And by that, we also enabled ourselves to develop these sprawls of single family houses all over the world, occupying our farmland and facing nowadays the dramatic problem of increased energy costs and so on. This picture is a little bit old, but it shows the shift of the climate conditions quite clearly that we have to expect, at least in Europe. I don't have a similar drawing for Thailand, unfortunately, but for the colleagues from Italy, it shows that it will become hot. It will be a climate like in Florence soon in Vienna, not yet, as we faced in the last days, but in the future we have to deal with the fact that the cities will overheat. So that means we have to invest in microclimate. We have to provide living conditions, even in open spaces that are more human friendly, that are related to our environmental possibilities. That means humidity, that means shade, that means a lot of green elements. We have to bring back water and to open up our rivers, also to influence the climate, the microclimate. These water elements are important not only for the kids playing around in fountains, but also for the humidity of the space around. Trees need a lot of time to grow, so if you don't plant them now, we will not have them in time when we need the shade. And of course, another very important thing, we have to reconsider the qualities of vernacular architecture. People long time ago, they knew that it is difficult to live without a lot of energy. So as long as you can't provide electricity for the air conditioning or for heating, oil or gas for heating, then you have to deal with the architecture to provide the conditions that are appropriate. So we can learn a lot if we look in the past. We can learn a lot about how to provide public spaces that are usable, that provide shadow, that provide protection from rain or storm. Even now, we try to implement some additional facilities. Malaga is an example to have a kind of semi-shaded public space, at least in the pedestrian areas. And we can look, of course, to the north of Africa, where the people knew how to deal with hot climate since a very long time. Or, yeah, this is the landmark I showed you before already. Also, it's not only the rain protection that makes this public space attractive, it's also the sun protection that it provides nowadays. That's even as important as the other one. And of course, the natural ventilation, as Bernhard Rudowski showed us very clearly in his book, Vernacular Architecture, and the exhibition he did in MoMA. So this was a kind of overview, not only about the city of Vienna, but also about the challenges we have to deal with. And I hope it gave you an idea about the situation of the city that you will work on. And as far as I know, we have a couple of presentations now that will give you a more precise overview about the planning site itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Markus. Thank you. Jacobo, do you have any questions?
Yes, if you have any questions, it would be a pleasure for me to answer.
No, no particular question, but it was very interesting to see that the quality that you have highlighted in those projects are always the result of this strange and difficult mixture of social quality and physical spaces. The two things are always connected together to produce the quality we are looking for. You can, it's what we were discussing with my students last lecture. You cannot reach any real quality in life if you only produce a beautiful building without any relationship between the citizens, the neighborhood, or the users. And Vienna is the best example we have, and the history of housing. It's the classical reference for studying this kind of goal, and how the municipality, and now also, as you have shown, all of those housing developers has done for reaching those goals. So it was very interesting for us. It's a confirmation of what we have said. So thank you, Professor Tomaselli.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're very right, because I mean, at the beginning, this kind of social interaction of the neighborhood was meant to be part of a process to somehow create a new citizen. When we start with the social housing program in the 1920s in Vienna, after the First World War, the idea of the socialist city council was to create a strong together feeling among the workers that live in this new residential building. The architecture had its contribution to that by, for example, the entrance to the buildings is always from the courtyard. Or in the urban fabric of the 19th century, in the speculative developments with this rigid grid, the entrance to the building is always from the street. So this change to bring the people first into a common open space where they can have a dialogue, where they have common facilities like bathrooms and kitchens and kindergartens and so on, this totally changed also the social behavior and the social interaction. So from an anonymity to a community. And this is somehow continuing, not exactly in this architectural language, but it's still continuing by this importance of the social facilities that are part of the new social housing or subsidized housing developments. So you have to provide, of course, a space where people can join, can come together and celebrate. Also maybe a library where they can come into a discussion with each other and so on. So there are many, many small additional features in a residential building that are contributing to the development of a community.
Yeah, I just want to share, but it's not actually the questions. I think it's very interesting to see the social housing in Vienna, and like comparing to what we have in Bangkok in terms of social housing is a little bit different, because maybe in terms of like number of populations and the way of life here and there may be a little bit different. That's why comparing in terms of conditions, maybe we have a poorer condition than you. But I think your example is actually reflect the importance of the public space and how people actually bonded to the place that they live. We also try to embrace and improve that in our social housing, but unfortunately, most of the social housing is actually provided by the government. So if we have a chance to provide this type of building by an architect or by the design profession, maybe we have a nicer building as we told in Vienna. Yeah.
I have a small question. Thank you so much for the lecture. I would like to know, like in the social housing in Vienna, is it like the government gonna fund the whole project, or is the inhabitants own, who is the ownership of the buildings? Can the
yeah. There is two to discuss that. So from 1920 till the Second World War, most of the social housing was built and owned by the city of Vienna. The money they had for this was a result of a special tax. At that time, the city of Vienna could control over the taxes. And they implemented a special tax only for social housing. After the Second World War, this was not anymore the fact. So the city didn't build as much as before, but in the same time, developers started to build subsidized housing, which has to fulfill specific criteria given by the city of Vienna that makes them accessible to land and to fundings. So if they fulfill criteria like not being revenue oriented but socially oriented companies, then they receive access to land, to construction sites that are somehow lower in their price than the market value. The same with the fundings for the building construction itself. So if you fulfill certain requirements, then you get better fundings than on the free market. But in the last couple of years, when the interest rate became very low, I don't know how it was in Thailand, but in Europe it was extremely low, nearly zero or negative. These fundings didn't have any value anymore because money was cheap. More and more the market switched a little bit into the free market, into the market-oriented housing, and the social housing suffered a little bit under these circumstances. That funding itself doesn't have any power anymore to guarantee certain qualities. But that's now changing again, so the rates rise and the situation will become different very soon.
So now the situation is changing.
Yeah, sorry, to answer the second part of the question. After the Second World War, the ownership for the subsidized housing was in this non-profit oriented organizations or companies. So not anymore directly in the city of Vienna, as it was before the Second World
War. So in that sense, like how can, because from the picture, I feel like the community is kind of inherited, like from like several generations. So, but the ownership, is it like if the people who are living there kind of died, can their family kind of inherit the space? How can the communities like kind of continue in the social housing?
Nariman, I think you know even better than me, but I think that if you're a very close relative, like a son or a daughter or a child, any kind of, then you can enter the contract. But you can't give it to your aunt or your stepbrother or something like that. Also, there are some limits where you can give the contract to the next generation. The next generation is always welcome, but not exactly the whole family, let's say, the bigger family. Yeah.